It was a warm summer evening in 1997, and I was a foreign grad student in Northern California, planning to go back to my country after graduation. My girlfriend at the time was visiting me for the summer, and we decided to take a road trip down to Southern California. We wanted to see Santa Barbara, Monterey, Venice Beach, San Diego, and even drive down into Baja. We eventually found ourselves at a motel in San Diego, and my girlfriend insisted that we stay at a motel near the beach so that we could step out and swim in the morning. I was exhausted from driving all day, so I let her handle the check-in while I unloaded our suitcases. As we entered the room, I noticed a smaller door next to our motel room door that said service personnel only. It was right next to our room, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Our room was built narrow, but it had a big bed and bathroom, and on the left wall, just across from the bed, there was a giant mirror, but the mirror was fixed into the wall, not hanging on it, and I found it extra creepy. When I pointed it out to my girlfriend, she dismissed my concerns as paranoia. We took a nap and then headed out for some food and to check out the town. As we returned to the motel, I noticed that the parking lot was now 2/3 full. We were early, my girlfriend said, and I felt foolish for my earlier paranoia. We spent the evening having dinner and driving around town until we decided it was time to go back to the motel. It was dark, and I was trying to read the map while my girlfriend drove. As we drove back to the motel, we saw a strange figure walking towards us. It was a tall, dark-haired man with small eyes who looked like he was in his late 20s. He had a strange aura around him, and I couldn't shake off the feeling that something was not right. My girlfriend didn't seem to notice anything unusual about him and drove past him without a second thought. We finally arrived back at the motel, and as we got out of the car, I noticed the strange man was now standing at the motel counter. He was looking at us with a sinister grin on his face. My girlfriend didn't seem to notice him, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was watching us. We made our way up to our room, and as we settled in for the night, I couldn't help but feel like we were being watched. As we were about to fall asleep, we heard a faint tapping sound coming from the mirror. I dismissed it as the wind or some other natural occurrence, but the tapping became more persistent, and I couldn't ignore it anymore. I walked up to the mirror and noticed that it was slightly loose. As I touched it, the mirror suddenly swung open, revealing a small peephole that was connected to the service room next door. My heart sank as I realized what was happening. The man at the counter was watching us through the peephole in the mirror. My girlfriend finally realized what was happening and started to panic. We tried to leave the room, but the door wouldn't budge. We were trapped. The tapping on the mirror became louder and more persistent, and I realized that the man was trying to break through the mirror. We were terrified and didn't know what to do. Suddenly, we heard a loud crash, and the mirror shattered into a million pieces. The man had broken through. He lunged at us, and we fought him off as best we could. It was a struggle for survival, and we were fighting for our lives. We managed to push. I sat there for a moment, paralyzed with fear and disbelief. Was this really happening? My girlfriend's screams snapped me back to reality, and I saw her trying to fight off the attacker with all her strength. I had to do something, anything, to help her. I lunged towards the attacker, my fists flying in a rage. I could feel the impact of my punches as they connected with his body, but he was much stronger than I had anticipated. He quickly overpowered me and pinned me to the ground, his hands closing around my throat. As I gasped for air, I could see the terror in my girlfriend's eyes as she watched helplessly. I knew I had to do something, but I was quickly losing consciousness. Just as I thought it was all over, I heard a loud crash and the attacker fell off of me. It was the motel manager, wielding a large metal pipe. He had come to our rescue, and in that moment, I felt a surge of relief and gratitude wash over me. We quickly got up and made our way out of the room, fleeing the motel and never looking back. It was only later that we found out the truth about the motel. It had been used as a hideout by a notorious serial killer who had been preying on unsuspecting travelers for years. The motel manager had been his accomplice, luring victims into the room with the mirror and helping the killer to carry out his gruesome acts. We were lucky to have escaped with our lives that night, but the memory of the motel and the horror we experienced there would stay with us forever. From that day on, I knew that nothing was ever as it seemed, and that danger could lurk in the most unexpected places. As a lover of the outdoors and a seasoned hunter, I had always believed that the woods were my sanctuary, a place where I could be at one with nature and all its wonders. But that all changed one fateful night in the spring of 2018. I had taken my young son and loyal dog out to the Francis Marion and Sumter National Forest to test out a new camper shell on my recently purchased truck. We found a secluded area off a dirt road and made dinner before settling in for the night as soon as darkness fell. It was around 11 p.m. when I was awoken by my dogs growling. I sat up and looked out the back of the truck, and that's when I saw them. Hundreds of small white balls of light darting around in the distance. They seemed to be converging on our campsite, hovering for a few seconds before slowly making their way towards us. At first, I thought they were just dust orbs, but the light they produced was unlike anything I had ever seen. They were a soft white light, and they didn't blink like fireflies or other insects that I had encountered before. For 30 minutes, they floated around us, concentrating around the truck. My son was fast asleep, but I couldn't take my eyes off of them. They seemed to be watching us, studying us. I was paralyzed with fear, unsure of what to do. Finally, I worked up the nerve to open the truck and lit a lantern, and they promptly disappeared. After turning off the lights and locking back up, they came back again. I watched them until I finally fell asleep around 1 a.m. The next morning, when we tried to leave, the battery was dead on the new truck. I couldn't understand how it could have happened as we hadn't used any power during the night. A week later, I had to replace the electric control module. I couldn't help but wonder if there was a connection between the strange lights and the sudden failure of my truck. I couldn't shake off the feeling of unease that had taken hold of me ever since that night. It was like something had attached itself to me, and it wasn't willing to let go. As the days turned into weeks and the weeks turned into months, I found myself haunted by the memory of those mysterious lights. They had invaded my sanctuary, and I couldn't help but feel like they were still watching me, waiting for their next move. I have since stopped going into the woods at night, afraid of what I might find. But the fear that those lights had instilled in me was always there, lurking in the back of my mind, reminding me of the fragility of the world around us and the unknown horrors that lay hidden in the darkness. As a young foreign student in South Korea, I was used to getting random Facebook friend requests from guys who wanted to learn English or make foreign friends. So when Nico, a heavily pierced and tattooed guy who claimed to be Japanese, sent me a request, I didn't think much of it. We had a lot of mutual friends, and after a few messages back and forth, I accepted his friend request. At first, our conversations were casual and harmless, but then Nico started getting more aggressive and would often turn my comments into arguments. He would ask if I had a boyfriend and then insist that we should be together. When I declined, he insulted me based on my looks and said overly graphic things he would do to me if he ever saw me. I tried to block and forget about it, but when I mentioned my experience to a friend, she recognized him and told me that he had done the same thing to other girls. One girl even met up with him and found out that he didn't even go to our university. He lived over an hour away and would travel there daily to obsess over which girl he would find on Facebook next. I was freaked out, but I didn't think much of it until Nico started messaging me from different accounts, claiming to be his friends. He said he had been hacked and begged me to unblock him so we could talk it over. I ignored the messages, but they kept coming, and they became more and more violent and aggressive. One day, after classes had finished, I was at a convenience store in the building when I turned around, and Nico was standing right beside me. He didn't say anything, and I felt my heart pounding in my chest. I tried to back away, but he grabbed my arm and whispered, "You can't block me forever, pretty girl." I managed to pull away and ran out of the store. I didn't know what to do, so I went to the Institute for Language to talk to one of my professors. But when I got there, I found out that Nico had already been there, looking for me. My professor called the police, and they told me to stay with a friend and not go home alone. The next few days were a blur of fear and paranoia. I was scared to go out and scared to stay in. I slept with the lights on and barricaded my door. But then, just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, I received a package in the mail. It was a small, thin tube with a note attached that read, "Open me." I hesitated for a moment before I slowly unrolled the tube. Inside, I found a series of photographs, all of me taken from a distance. Some were taken at school, some were taken at my apartment building, and others were taken when I was out with my friends. I felt sick to my stomach as I realized that Nico had been watching me this whole time. I called the police again, and they searched his apartment, but they didn't find him. He had disappeared without a trace. I don't know where Nico is now, but I still see him in my nightmares. I still feel his cold breath on my neck, and I can still hear his whispered threats. I don't know if he's still watching me, but I always feel like someone is following me, and I never feel safe. I remember it like it was yesterday, that terrifying night when I almost lost my life. I've always been one to walk around in the dark. It's just a thing I do, especially when I'm alone. I find it calming, and my eyes adjust pretty quickly to the darkness. So when the sun goes down, I just wander around the house without turning any lights on. Even when I go to the bathroom, I do it in the dark. But that night was different. I had come home exhausted after a long day and hit the sack earlier than usual. It took less than a minute for me to fall asleep, but I woke up a few hours later with an urgent need to pee. I was so tired that I tried to fall back asleep, but the urge was too strong. I tried to ignore it, but I just couldn't. I decided to get up and use the bathroom. The 4-story apartment was silent as I stumbled my way through the dark hallway. I reached the bathroom and stood over the toilet. I was about to start my business when I remembered the fluffy cover on the lid. It occasionally fell down by itself, and the last thing I needed was a wet toilet seat. I reached down to check and found that the lid was closed. I lifted it and started to pee. Then it happened. The lid fell down again. I cursed and realized I had to stop the flow. I had to lift the lid again, but this time it stayed up. I resumed peeing, and it felt great. But then the damn lid fell down again. I had to stop the flow, and I knew I had to put the cover in the laundry too. I lifted the lid once again and finished my business. As I reached for the light switch, I noticed something odd. The translucent bathroom window was slightly open, and someone was standing there. I froze as I tried to make out who it was. It was a man, and he was watching me. He had a knife in his hand, and when he saw that I had spotted him, a smile spread across his face. He waved the knife in front of the window and whispered something. I was terrified. What had he been planning to do to me? How long had he been there? If I had just gone back to bed, would he have attacked me? I knew I had to call the police, so I did. But when they arrived, there was nothing they could do. I couldn't give them a description because I couldn't make out any of his features. I shuddered at the thought of what could have happened that night. It was a wake-up call for me. From then on, I made sure to always lock the bathroom window and turn on the lights. I still walk around in the dark, but I'm always more cautious now. You never know what lurks in the darkness, waiting to strike. As I sit here, trying to recount my story, my palms are sweating and my heart is racing. You see, I have panic disorder, a mental illness that has caused me to experience extreme anxiety, severe panic attacks, and a host of other problems. I've been struggling with this for over a year now, and although it is getting better, it's still very difficult to deal with. To make matters worse, my husband and I have been married for over a year now, and during most of that time, I was undergoing medical issues that no doctors could seem to explain. I was having panic attacks all the time, and they would be so severe that I would have to be taken to the ER. They would have to literally sedate me just to calm me down. I was also losing weight at an alarming rate, becoming visibly sicker and sicker as time went on. Not even a month after we got married, I lost my job, and my husband started working the second shift, which was from 4 p.m. to 3 a.m. He would arrive home around 4 in the morning, leaving me alone most of the time. My parents and younger brother did live close by, but at the moment, my mother and father were unable to watch over me. They did call as frequently as they could, but that was as much as they could do. In May, I was told by doctors that I was literally at death's door, and unless something happened real quick, my family was going to lose me. I was given medications to help with the panic attacks and to get me to eat and the like. They wanted to hospitalize me, but I refused. My parents decided that when they and my younger brother went to Florida the next month, they were taking me with them. Again, keep in mind I was both anxious and extremely sick. At the same time, my real issues had just begun. And not with me either, but with our neighbors. You see, we'd never actually met our neighbors personally before this point. My husband had lived in the trailer for a month on his own before we got married, and he always said they were a bit odd. But they didn't seem to be of much concern. Once I came into the picture, though, that all changed. The person who lived in the trailer before us was actually a cousin of mine who'd rented from another cousin and his wife who lived states away. Nora was a huge druggie and a drug dealer, so people got real used to getting their fixes and drugs at the trailer. We now lived in a few months before we moved in. She got in trouble with the law and landed in jail for quite some time. I guess our neighbors, who, according to our landlords, were drug addicts and raging alcoholics as well, perhaps thought that she was back. I'm not quite sure. I suppose this is because I was so sick that they never actually saw who I was. They only knew that I was living there. They became active at night. During the day, they were mostly quiet. Every once in a while, they would do something outside. But for the most part, nothing really happened. It would always start after my husband left for work. My car would still be there, which I guess told them that at least someone was still home. It started off innocently enough, driving up and down in front of the house and parking in the road directly in front of it and waiting for a long time. Sometimes they'd honk the horn at me, but I just ignored them several times. Even called my parents because they'd stuck around so long asking them what to do. They said for the time to just ignore them. Perhaps they thought I was standing there, frozen in fear, as I watched the truck disappear into the darkness. My dad and husband went outside to check for any damage and to see if they could get a better look at the truck's license plate. But it was too dark and they were too far away. They came back inside, assuring me that everything was okay and that I was safe. But I didn't feel safe. Not anymore. The next few nights were quiet. Too quiet. I couldn't help but feel like they were watching me, waiting for the right moment to strike again. My panic attacks were becoming more frequent and more severe. My husband tried his best to comfort me, but he had to work and couldn't be with me all the time. I felt so alone and vulnerable. Then, one night, I heard a knock on the door. It was around 10 p.m. and my husband was at work. I knew it couldn't be him. I hesitated, unsure of what to do. The knocking continued, louder and more insistent. Finally, I mustered up the courage to peek through the window beside the door. I saw a shadowy figure standing on my porch. I couldn't make out any details, but I knew it wasn't my husband. My heart was pounding in my chest as I tried to think of what to do next. Should I call the cops? Should I grab the shotgun my father-in-law gave me? The knocking turned into pounding and I knew I had to do something. I grabbed the shotgun and held it tightly as I opened the door. The figure stepped forward, revealing itself to be a woman. She was disheveled, with matted hair and bloodshot eyes. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. "Please," she said, her voice shaking. "Please, you have to help me. They're after me." I didn't know who she was talking about, but I could tell she was terrified. I let her inside and locked the door behind her. She collapsed onto my couch, sobbing uncontrollably. I tried to calm her down, but she wouldn't stop crying. Finally, she managed to speak. "My name is Nora," she said. "I used to live in this trailer before you did. The people who lived here before you, they were my customers. I sold drugs to them." I felt sick to my stomach as she spoke. I had heard about Nora before, but I never knew the extent of her involvement with our neighbors. I didn't know what to say to her, but I knew I had to do something to help her. "They're after me," she said again, her voice barely above a whisper. "They know I'm here. They'll kill me if they find me." I knew I had to call the cops, but I was afraid to leave Nora alone. What if they came back while I was gone? I tried to reassure her that everything would be okay, but I could tell she didn't believe me. We sat in silence for a few minutes, listening to the sounds of the night. Suddenly, we heard a car pull up outside. Nora's eyes widened in fear, and she started to hyperventilate. "They're here," she whispered. I grabbed the shotgun and headed towards the door, ready to defend myself and Nora if necessary. But when I looked outside, there was no one there. The car had disappeared. I was confused and scared. Where did they go? Why did they leave? I couldn't make sense of anything that was happening. Nora was still crying on the couch, her whole body shaking with fear. The next few hours were a blur. I don't remember much of what happened.